Hey there, TouchDesigner programmers, Matthew here. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at some kind of interesting and fun refraction and reflection examples. We're going to kind of take apart what's happening here and better understand how we can look at how to achieve some of these effects and what that might mean. So the first one we are going to experiment with here is what looks like this. Right, this is a kind of slick little technique that is a highly reflective surface. In this case, we're really digging in for pure mirror-like reflection in this world. And so we're going to try and pick apart how this particular example is working and what we can do to actually reproduce some similar results here. So let's dive in and get started. Okay, so to get started, how do we get here? Well, how I got here is I've been reading this cool little book, the OpenGL for Shading Language Cookbook. You can find it on Amazon. This is not a plug. This is more just if you want to find some interesting ways to do some research and kind of dig into some of these approaches, this is a good place to get started. And one of the pieces that's pointed out in that particular example is the way that we deal with reflection is, we kind of have to fake it a little bit. That's a part of what this process looks like, which is fine. That's all right. But what we want to do is we want to texture our object, right? We want to texture this thing with the world. We want to put the world right back on top of it. And how might we achieve that? What's a technique for thinking about that kind of approach? Well, we're going to look at that. And that's exactly what we're going to pull apart. So let's open up a fresh project and throw away everything just like usual. We're not going to worry about the animation part yet. We're going to add that as we carry on and get closer here to the end. But instead, we need to set up some of the kind of fundamental pieces of our process. So I'm going to go ahead and start with our usual suspects in all of this, right? So let's set up a rendering pipeline. So I want a camera, I want a light, and I want a geometry. If you hold down the control key while you click on these goobers in the OpCreate dialog, it won't actually close the OpCreate, and you can leave it open while you add all your pieces to your network. Okay, so we've got a camera, we've got a light, we've got our geometry. So far, so good. Let's go ahead and add a render top. So we actually want to render this, see it in all of its exciting, wonderful glory over here. Now, I want to start with a cube. A cube is a more interesting place, I think, to kind of dig into some of these pieces. So we're going to go ahead and first things first, we're going to dive into our geometry. We're going to throw away that torus. We're going to add a box. We're going to add a null to the end of this. Alt-N is our hotkey for that. Yeah, Summit, you're so swanky. Okay, so we've got a cube, right? That looks swell so far. So let's bump out here. And we've got a cube here showing up in our world. Okay, well, that's great, wonderful. That could be cooler, but we'll take that for now. The next thing we're going to do before we move too far along is let's go ahead and add a Fong material. And while we're at it, lately what I've been doing is I've been making sure that my materials also have nulls at the end of them, because it's not uncommon that you want to swap these goobers out from time to time. And I'm going to go ahead and set this at an angle 45, 45, just so it's not totally perfectly centered anymore. Okay, so that's very boring, but that's all right. That's something to start working with. When we think about reflections, right, when we think about we need a world that we can reflect back on the object, a really great, easy place for us to start with that is actually starting with a kind of skybox model. Same kind of idea that you might find in Unity or Unreal. Is what's the thing that exists out at the very far horizon? What exists at the edges? And an easy way to kind of think about that actually is to start with a sphere. Actually, excuse me, let's add a geometry. And this is going to be our skybox. I'm actually going to call it Geo Sky. I'm going to dive inside here. I'm going to get rid of that torus. I'm going to add a sphere. Excellent. And then Alt-N, I'm going to add a null. I'm going to set that to display and render. Okay, great. So I've got this sphere. Now it encompasses my box. That's great. But I need that to be just like a little bit bigger, right? If I was to split my view here and take a look at my geometry viewer, whoa, too close. We can see that here's our camera, here's our world, and I want this world, I want that to encompass where my camera and where my light is also. So for my sphere, for my skybox, I'm going to go ahead and turn that up all the way to 10. Now it's hard to see anything in here, right? Because, you know, it's just the same gray sky, but we can fix that. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with a movie file in, and then we'll do the usual, add a null. This is going to be our null sky texture. I'm going to scoot this over a little bit. Let's go ahead, and this time let's add a constant material. So we're going to pretend as if this thing is emitting light into our world, right? We don't want this part to be reflective. We want this, our skybox is really going to kind of be fake emissive, really, in some kind of tricksy ways. This is going to be our color map over here. Let's add another null. All right, this time, this is our null sky. All right. And finally, we can drop this as a material onto our sphere, onto our world. Now that sure looks distorted and weird, and part of the reason it looks so weird, right, is because this particular texture isn't really well suited for this geometry. And in fact, we could probably do ourselves a favor. Instead of a mesh, we could make this, oops, not a primitive, excuse me. NURBS might have some like cleaner swoops here in the way that it handles some of these lines. But we still have something that's kind of like oddly distorted. And what we really want is in this case, either a cube map to be our skybox, or better yet, we want to use an equirectangular image. An equirectangular projection is just a different kind of distortion, right? And what this does is that we imagine that here at the bottom, right, this part that's like all stretched out and smooshed is actually what shows up here at the poles, right here at the bottom of our image. There's where those bits kind of line up. And all the way up at the top, we similarly have a place where all of the top portion of our texture gathers, and that's all pulled from this goober up here. So this is how we end up with our skybox, our equirectangular map that's then textured onto our sphere. So the trick of this is that actually from inside of it, what we end up with, in fact, if we were right at our world origin, and we can turn off our box, because that's where our box happens to sit right now, turn off its display. If we get real close over here to our world origin point, we should see something that looks almost non-distorted, almost as if we were there. I'm going to switch this back and get rid of this NURBS business. Let's go back to a mesh. Schmutzy. And let's 120. There we go. A little more definition, right? Some more grid points in there. It gives us a nicer, smoother texture, or smoother set of UVs. So here, if we're real close to our world origin, or almost on it there, right? Our distortion very nearly disappears. This is the kind of trick of a lot of VR systems and really good dome mapping, right? Is if your camera lives right at the center of the world, well then it certainly looks like the world is actually perfectly represented around you, which is swell. That's, we want that a lot of times. But in fact, what's going on is that we're going to turn our cube back on in here. All right, cool. Where'd you go? If we turn that back onto display, we'll see that sure enough, it's right here in the center of our world. Okay, so we've got our cube here. All right, that's great. We can see our cube inside of our world. We can see the world is kind of nicely textured behind it. We see a little bit of distortion. We could cheat this a little bit if we got our camera a little bit closer, right? We could push some of this around. This is like pretty tolerable. I'll believe this illusion for the moment.